Thank you for joining us for the second session of our voter education project. This evening, we'll focus on the ins and outs of voting and why the Black vote has always mattered. Discover the crucial role your voice plays in democracy. Now, let's hear from our panel.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello there.
Hello, hello.
Greetings.
Great.
All right.
Everybody,
We're okay. You were a little blurry. You're a little blurry.
oh, we're everyone on this podcast view. We are your African American area. We are a few of our great colleagues that serve this area, and we are honored to be on with you tonight to talk to you in part 2 of our 3-part series on African American voting, and we call it Voting is Your Black Job. All right. And so I am here tonight, Apostle Craig Coe.
Well,
So
alrighty.
apparently, whoever is serving as the moderator, that happens to them. It happened to me last week. So I'll continue. Thank you for joining us. We are talking this week about voter suppression and voter intimidation, as we're looking at the different elements to voting, some of the challenges and obstacles we face, but how it is, as Apostle was saying, our Black job to persevere, to overcome, and to press through. I believe there was a video presentation that those in the studio were going to show before we got into our topic. Feel free to roll it now. Or not. Well, while they're waiting, if everyone could introduce you.
Oh, there it goes.
There it is.
All right.
Okay.
I think we're working out some live broadcast.
Right. Well, yes. Technology is always fun. So everyone, if you could just introduce yourselves and let everyone know who you are, the congregation you're blessed to serve, etc. Pastor K, you're in my top left, so why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good evening again to everyone and to all of our viewers. I'm Karen Johnson. I'm Senior Pastor at First Christian Community Church of Annapolis.
And then the other sister clergy with us on the top right.
My name is Dr. Tori Butler. I'm the senior pastor of Asbury Town United Methodist Church in Severna Park, Maryland. I'm just excited to be here to continue to have this discussion around voters' rights, voter suppression, as well as just how we can continue to do this work together.
All right,
I'm Pastor Jay Offer from Harvest Crusade Ministries in Glen Burnie. And we are excited because our main focus is to touch hearts with the love of Christ. And what better way to do it than to share your voice, the power of your voice at the ballot box, and to educate you and to empower you.
And I'm Pastor Stephen Tillett, Senior Pastor at Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church in Annapolis, Maryland. Looks like they're trying to roll the clip again, so we will zip and let them do their thing. Or not. Okay, so I was privileged to Pastor Reverend Dr. Zena Pierre invited me to attend a gathering of clergy in Prince George's County today over at Reed Temple. And while we were there, the AME bishop for the area, Bishop Jackson, spoke, and he apparently had been bishop in Georgia. Pastor and Senator Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were elected to the United States Senate, and President Biden won the state of Georgia. And he was just talking about how it is our Black job as clergy over the next few weeks. Every week we need to be talking about getting out to vote. Every week we need to be talking about voter registration. Every week we need to be gearing up for the last Sunday in October, when we can use that as Souls to the Polls Sunday. He said fried chicken doesn't hurt. Everybody chuckled, but they understood. And that we want to just utilize the strength that we have as clergy in the African American community to get our folks out. And one thing I learned today, there's now no excuse whatsoever for not voting. You can register to vote on election day. You can literally go to your poll, whatever the polling place is in your neighborhood, your vicinity, and you can register to vote and cast your vote at that time. And I asked them, well, what documentation do you need? Driver's license, utility bill from your address, whatever. They said, no, you don't need any, which surprised me, but fine. Have some anyway, just in case. But they said it's not necessary. So even if you don't register, and you can register up until the 15th of October, and then if you're not registered, then you can still on election day show up to the polls and vote. And the apostle's back.
Y'all, I don't know what happened, but I know this must be good information.
Well, welcome to my life last week.
Yeah, Steve, I repent, Steve. I repent. Okay, so let me share with you, because I do believe we have a special guest in the background as well, waiting in the back office. So I wanted to just share from a Black history major perspective about history of voting, because I find that a lot of people who reluctantly do not vote, I really believe it's tied to the lack of education. I really do. I did a survey with some folks, and I was asking them, what is their connection to voting and growing up? How did they see voting and things like that? And most people, when they voted, did not really vote other than in the presidential elections. And that was with people kind of enforcing them to do so, and kind of reminding them. A lot of people weren't even registered when they hit 18. But this is the piece that really was got me the A on the paper, because I was drawing the connection between our exposure to voter history in the United States and our school curriculum, and our willingness to participate in the election process. And what I found is that there's a direct connection between the way we receive education about history and voting, that most times our history programs do not talk about voter disenfranchisement at all. It'll mention when women got the right and when men got the right, and Black men, and then it goes on to paint like this glorious history. In some kind of way, they throw Martin Luther King in there. But then we all have the right to vote, but they don't talk about some of the other reasons why we had to fight for our rights and are still fighting. And the last thing that I picked up that was interesting was that most African Americans that did not understand the connection between their voice and their vote usually did not participate in student government on a middle and high school level. Most of them had not participated, and most that I spoke with said that their student government was made up mostly of white students. And I thought that all of this is a direct connection to us feeling any relevance whatsoever when it's time to go to the polls. And so with that being said, I thought today it would be great if we share with our viewing audience, which is quite a few of y'all now. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to share with you dissertation. It's a really quick overview about voting. And I want to first share my little statement that should get your interest. And that is that the framers of the Constitution, the founders, the founding fathers, they did not envision, based on this tug of war about voting. They did not envision an America that was all inclusive. They envisioned a white Christian independent world. Okay. And their actions from the time of the American Revolution to the time of the framing of the Constitution is a clear depiction of such. So if you for a moment can kind of picture in your mind 1776, we won our independence from Britain, and everybody is supposed to be declared equal. According to the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. But then just a few years later, as they come together now to go from colonies into states, states are encouraged to write their charter, and they want to be careful to learn the lesson from their independence from Britain. And that is not to give the government too much control, but at the same time, how do we have a government that functions for the people, by the people? And so when they start framing this Constitution, they kind of go back on something they agreed on. They said all men are created but equal, but we don't feel that way about the Constitution. Okay. And so we'll start to see their actions in their language. Let me show you what I mean. For example, when the states got the opportunity to begin to form their own constitutions, states like New Jersey actually gave women the right to vote. All right. Women, and in particular, they were women who had what they call 50 pounds of proclamation. Okay. In other words, they had some property. Now, of course, this was not young women or married women often. Okay. But those who did have this opportunity, they made their voices heard. They were involved on the local, state, and federal levels. Okay. And this was in the New Jersey Constitution. This was allowed. In fact, we pride ourselves on the language of that Constitution that was gender neutral. It did not specify men versus women. However, the framing of the Constitution brought about a change in local states and how they framed their rights for their citizens. Okay, so here we go. So what happens is now we start to see, wait a minute, we got a problem because we got a whole lot of people living here. There are a lot of folks. And if we're giving rights to everybody, we won't be able to control this narrative. And so in framing the Constitution, they came up with this idea that how do we elect the president? As they were preparing to elect their first president, what happened to be George Washington. How do we elect the president office? How do we elect him? Okay, and they came up with this. There was a big battle. The North had their position on it. Well, the most people, the popular vote, we're it. We have the most free people. But then the South is saying, no way, no way. We actually have more people. It's just ours are property. They're slaves, and so really we should count them. If we count our property, then we should have better representation. But it is the North that comes back and says, I tell you what, we'll count your slaves as 3/5 of a person. Okay. And therefore, we will allow you to have representation based on population and your representatives in the total number of people in your state. And this allows you to send to Congress a group of people who will elect the president. All right. This is really good because this is what everybody's so confused about today, this whole process. Believe me, they were confused then and we're still confused. Okay. And we'll see this throughout history. But this is what happens to us. We start to see this big tug of war. The first president is elected, right? And when that president is elected, as much as we like to say, we now have the Continental Congress, we now have an official United States, we still have states that have individual rights, and many of them are not on board on all issues. So we are still trying to find a balance between what are states' rights and what are our constitutional boundaries. What is it that we do and do not want as a country? So I just want to put this out there that the first election of the first president was limited only to white male landowners. that disqualified a whole lot of people intentionally. This is written and this was stated in the Constitution. This was their intention, and this is what went forth. Now, if we fast forward a little ways, we start to see how the three branches of government kind of weigh in, right? You got your legislative, your judicial, right? And your executive branch. Well, the Supreme Court had a lot of weight on a lot of the decisions that had been made from the very beginning, even to now. I put this picture in because I thought it would be interesting that many of us who are Marylanders are watching this will understand the real big role that Maryland legislators played in this whole process of granting the privilege to people versus the rights, right? It was really like a privilege to vote. And this gentleman right here, he actually had a seat right here at the Annapolis State House since 1782. He's been sitting there until recently he was removed from his position. He was one of our representatives from Calvert County, born in Calvert County, Maryland. He was a Supreme Court justice by the name of Roger Brooke Taney. Okay, he was the guy that ruled on the big decision on the Dred Scott case. Now, Dred Scott was a slave who traveled with his master from a slave state into a free state. Because remember now, although we're dealing with a constitution that's passing amendments and whatnot to say what is legal, what is not, states still had a right to make decisions and interpret it the way they wanted it. So he left a slave state and went into a free state where technically he is a free man. But then he gets married, which he's entitled to do, right? And then ownership of this man is passed down from one owner to another. And each owner assumes they have a right over him. And so he is assigned to go to various places and serve as a slave that is under assignment or ownership. But then he gets smart and said, hold up. If I'm free in this state, then aren't I free indeed? Okay, this case was so big that it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the ruling came down from one of Maryland's finest, Roger Brooke. He says, sorry, y'all. And he put it, and I put it in quotes here. African people of African descent are not included, were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution. There it is, y'all, right?
Right.
You can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. More specifically, that African Americans were not entitled to full liberty of speech, to hold public meetings, and to keep or carry arms, along with other constitutionally protected rights and privileges. Look at this. The Supreme Court is weighing in on this, y'all, right? If there was any progress, this is regress, right? But wait a minute, we got some more action here. Check this out. But just a few years after Roger Brooke Taney wages and comes to this conclusion, our country enters into official civil war, right? And as a result, we've got a 13th Amendment, which bans slavery, right? We've got a 14th Amendment, which grants citizenship to all people born in the United States and guarantees them equal protection under law. Then we got a 15th Amendment, which ensures that all citizens have the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. One of the things that is not mentioned often enough is what's going on with ex-slaves. Well, let me tell you, they're not sitting on the plantation singing "Poor Massa, Poor Massa." They are actually coming together as their own Congress, coming to Washington, D.C. for the former slave convention every year held in Washington, D.C., where they begin to argue some of the very critical issues that are the rights of citizenship. For example, they fought in that Civil War. If it were not for Black people fighting in that Civil War, this thing would have come out differently. So they want to know, where's our pension? What about retirement for us? How about the fact we're ex-slaves? How can we now claim ourselves? How do we claim our family members? Okay, so you have former slaves that are advocating in DC even though they necessarily were not given the right to hold position. But it ushers us into a time that is so critical. As we hear folks saying, make America great again, as a theologian, as a historian, I often ask the question to everyone, when was America ever great? There is actually a time period when America was great. It was called Reconstruction.
Yep.
It was right after the Civil War. We had troops in the South to make sure that Black folks can have the right to be human beings. And as a result, we had Blacks that were actually elected to Congress, ladies and gentlemen. We had representation in Congress, all right? And I really believe if it hadn't been for an election that kind of took the troops out of the South, called the Tilden Hayes Compromise, then we might would have had a Black president before Obama. All right. But the point I want to make is that this war back and forth has been because of the interpretation of this document that we hold so sacred called the Constitution. All right. Even when it comes to the abolishment of slavery, that Constitution says that slavery shall no longer be valid in the United States except as a punishment for a crime in which a person has been duly committed, right? Okay, well, why do we have such an overrepresentation of African American people in the jail systems? Because it legitimizes slavery. Let's go forward, okay, just to give you something to think about. So as the amendments push us forward, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, states start pushing back. The nerve of them to instill literacy tests. In other words, if you can read this, then you can vote. Okay, well, you know who that disqualifies, right? Poll taxes, right? All of these things start going into place in various states to stop African American people and also others from voting. Because I'm going to go there right now, because we weren't in this by ourselves, all right? And this is why we know for a fact how Obama won office, because it wasn't just Black people who voted, ladies and gentlemen, okay? This is why we got to understand how powerful our vote is. Look at this. Congress starts passing laws that favor the states. How does that happen? It happens because when you don't vote, the people who do vote, they send representation to Congress that represents their views. And so every time we have this change in Congress, we have this threat to the progress. So Congress starts passing laws that favors particular states, okay? And some of the laws that they passed resisted Native Americans from being able to even be called citizens. Then they come back again and say, hey, Native Americans can actually consider yourself citizens if you give up your land rights and deny your tribal rights. What are you saying here, right? Why are they giving up their land? Because there is a desire to expand westward. In the movies, they call it How the West Was Won. They make Cowboy look like the hero, but they won't tell the truth that are taking the land from natives. They weren't Indians, as Columbus falsely called them. They are indigenous. They are the natives of the land, right? But they were driven off their land and laws reinforced it, okay? So this not only happened to them, but the Chinese were being excluded. So Congress starts passing laws, the Chinese exclusion laws, to make sure that Chinese could never be citizens in the United States, okay? Anytime you had a group that migrated here that were not of European descent, a law popped up, okay? Let's go forward here. I'm almost done so we can have a good conversation. But yet still, there are times that Congress forges a path forward. For example, the Indian Citizenship Act. Right, the Indian Citizenship Act, and then you see the president standing right there, President Coolidge, proud of this agreement they've made now to give Indians, or as they call Indians, indigenous right to vote. Right, okay, giving them an opportunity to vote. And then to the China Exclusion Act. Here's the big one: getting a vote. Women fighting and gaining the access to vote. This changes the up until this time are treated just like minorities are treated, right? And so in a way, it's kind of good because it got women on the same page with minorities, which interesting enough today, we still, for the most part, are on the same page and in the same wagon, okay? Let's look at this. Some of the things more closer to where we are today. Most people that I polled or surveyed had knowledge of the voter 1965, and many people celebrated and said, "Oh yeah, I was alive then." And well, if we're so celebrative of this, if we celebrate this, why aren't we voting? Right? This was the question to ask. Why aren't we voting if we fought and struggled? Because the struggle did not begin there, right? But as a result, here we have the Voters' Right Act, 1964, 1965, we gained access to vote. Does it mean it's without disenfranchisement? Absolutely not. Now we got to throw in old Jim Crow, right? All of the Jim Crow laws came from individual states, ladies and gentlemen. In the United States of America, there's still great polarization when it comes to whether or not we should have the right to vote. In fact, it was such a heated argument that the Voters' Right Act had to be signed again in order for it to even pass the first time. In other words, it has an expiration date and it has to be voted on again in Senate and signed again. Now, that is a question I asked a group of, and none of them had any idea that it had to be upon again. So, some of our forward, as we can see, Congress sees that there needs to be an expanded need for us to include people with disabilities. So that is now included. Then we had to, and that was 22. Look how long it took for people with disabilities to be given voting protections. Protection, y'all. What does protection mean? It means that you're being threatened. You're being challenged. We had some rules that have changed in states where all of a sudden now have to show identification. These are state decisions that are made to voters, right? Then, of course, the big change in the 70s, where the voting age has been now reduced to 18. I want to make one statement that'll make your mouths drop wide open if you didn't know it. Did you know that the framers of the Constitution, the fathers of the Constitution, were as young as 18 years old? Did you not know that the oldest signer of that Constitution was only 44? Okay. Here's no one. It's coming up. Give it a sec. So here we see, ladies and gentlemen, is that we of giving rights to people to vote. We are 13 the voting rights. Lady, the formula that was at the heart of Voting Rights Act. Now voted against the put this in as the last slide because I want to make sure we understand, ladies and gentlemen, we shouldn't be at ease. We are still trying to defend our voice. But if you don't use your voice, then those that are taking your voice don't matter anyway. And I think that this is a good place to perhaps start this conversation because I think a lot of what people say to me are the reasons for not voting. They say their vote doesn't count. Well, I say we need to give you a history lesson because your vote has always mattered. And in fact, when it comes to electoral college, there are states that it's winner take all. It is winner take all. Yes, if we look at the history of, we've had where the popular vote, right? But an elector from the electoral college goes in and clicks the lever for the non-winner. So the Clinton race, Clinton and Trump, right? And it happened with Al Gore and Bush. Yet these moments happen, but they're not as frequent enough for you to say your vote doesn't matter. Okay, let's have a conversation, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk.
Before we do that,
weigh in on this, y'all. Weigh in.
I just want to ask: is Attorney Jones in the waiting room? Because if so, he's on a train on his way back from, I think he said New York. He's one of the leaders of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and they are knee deep in their work leading to the election. Is he in the room?
He is not in the room at the moment.
Okay, all right. So since you touched on the Electoral College, I would like to share just a paragraph from my book, Stop Falling for the Okie Doke, How the Lie of Race Continues to Undermine Our Country. And I wrote, well, actually these two paragraphs, but I'll just get right to it. I have two brief comments on the Electoral College. In a country that holds itself to be the exemplar of the principle of one person, one vote, how can a presidential candidate receive 35, 40, 45, or even 49.9% of the vote in a state and receive no electoral votes? Essentially, if your candidate didn't win your state, your voice and your vote don't count. They should at least pretend the votes of the people matter and allocate the electoral votes proportionally to the actual votes of the voters. But then here's the historical piece. Constitutional architect and slave owner James Madison, who was also our fourth president, himself stated these words about the creation of an electoral college. Check this. There was one difficulty of a serious nature, however, attending an immediate choice by the people. In other words, the votes would determine the outcome, period. The right of suffrage was much more divisive in the North rather than the Southern states, and the latter could have no influence in the election on the score of Negroes, our stolen ancestors. The substitution of electors obviated this difficulty and seemed on the whole to be liable to the fewest objections. So the Electoral College was put in the Constitution, number one, because as Apostle said, they did not have everybody participating. It was only basically white landowners. So even poor white men couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, and obviously almost all of our ancestors could not vote because they were enslaved. And so we are saddled in the 21st century with something that was deemed necessary at the end of the 18th century, the end of the 1700s, in order to form the Union, to begin the country. Fine, if that's what you needed to do to get started, okay. But why didn't they get rid of it after 1865, before they let the Southern states back in? Why haven't, and in the 1970s, there was actually a movement in Congress to eliminate the Electoral College that was favored by a majority of the people. But now that you have I'm just going to go straight for it, a Republican Party whose policy prescriptions do not meet the needs of a large majority of the country, they know they cannot win a presidential election, at least not the popular vote. The last time Republicans won the popular vote was Bush won, George H.W. Bush in 88, and then George W. Bush in 2004. Every other election from 92 through 2020, Democrats have won the popular vote. And so Republicans know their only way to get into the White House, to fill the Supreme Court with activist reactionaries that they say our Supreme Court is the most conservative Supreme Court in 90 years. 90 years ago was in the 1930s. My mother, who's now 100, was in elementary school 90 years ago. And this Supreme Court is the most conservative Supreme Court since the 1930s. And they think that's a good thing. The 1930s were good for some people. For white men, yes. For people with money, yes. For people that look like us, no. For women, no. And yet that's what they have engineered. And the Electoral College is the way they get it done. And that's why we hear all of this conversation about the battleground states. see a presidential candidate in like 42, 43 states, but they're focusing on these 7, which is why as we have our cousins on from around, we're sharing these videos around the country because it's not just about Maryland. If you are in Georgia, if you're in Wisconsin, you're in Nevada, you're in Arizona, you're in Pennsylvania, and guess what? In Texas, where there's a brother running for U.S. Senate so we can get rid of Ted Cruz, God help us. And he's close. The race is close to tie. And in Florida, where the race is very, very close, there's a woman running and it's neck and neck, it's tied. We can turn this thing, as my former Bishop Felton May used to say, turn the world upside down and right side up. But that's going to depend on you and your vote.
Yes. Others?
So
I think Pastor Tillett made a very good point in the very beginning. And in my mind, the Electoral College dilutes the voice of the people, the will of the people. And one of the things that I've constantly share with my congregation and those people that I deal with in the community is, the false narrative that it's a race thing has to be put down. And I think this nation can turn a corner if we begin to understand the struggle for power and who's pulling on each end of the tug of war rope. It's the haves, the ones that make up the majority of the wealth in this country. They want to keep it. And that's why they want to make sure that the people who are sympathetic to and understand the rich and the power that they have, are supporting them, and the people who can take them out of those positions of power, or at least not redistribute wealth, but give people more access to the benefits of this great country. Keep them blind, keep them out of the voting booth, keep them unaware that there is a way for this country to become greater than it ever was. And the power's in that voting box. The power is showing up at your local events that are happening, that your elected officials are having, paying attention to when a politician, for our politicians, our elected officials here in Anne Arundel County, are posting what's happening in Annapolis, what's happening for the county council, what's happening for us and our particular livelihood. If we got a hold of the concept that we in fact do have this power, it changed the entire nation and tilt power back to the people where it belongs.
Yes. Dr. Butler?
We had a question on the chat that was asked around what would it take to eliminate?
Yes.
Can the Electoral College be done away with?
Okay.
There is a formula for it, but it ain't gonna happen. The formula for it requires either that it be passed by a 2/3 majority in the Congress,
and then
you can't get a 2/3 majority in Congress to agree to turn on the water, to turn the lights on. So, because again, Republicans understand the only way we can get the White House and therefore make these awful judicial appointments so that we can keep the country in the 1930s is the Electoral College. Now, it never occurs to them that maybe if they change their policy prescriptions to meet the needs of more Americans, maybe they could win an election. But so the other way would be that it would go to the states, and 37 state legislatures, I believe, would need to pass it in order for it to become the law of the land. And again, because of gerrymandering, that's not going to happen either. Just very quickly, and just as an FYI for folks, if you know how to get to me on Facebook, I've been doing a series of reels on different things related to the country and our politics in this election. And the one that got posted today is one on gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is basically when the people in elected office choose their voters. I did not stutter. The people in elected office choose their voters. The way it's supposed to work is that we, the people, choose the people in office. But they put together these districts that favor them so they can get in office and stay in office for a generation and don't get a whole lot done on our behalf, rather than having districts that are contiguous, that are fair districts. Because I had a conversation once, I was at a conference, I'm not going to name the member of Congress, but basically the member said, well, as a result of this majority Black district in our state, not our state, but another state, I get to be here and do things for us. And I'm sure I was the only one in the room. I was like, well, I hear that. But my thought is just have fair districts. So you don't have all the Black folks crammed into one or two districts. Spread it out. Have the contiguous fair districts, and you make your case. And if there are enough people to feel like you're speaking to their needs and their self-interest, you'll get elected. But we don't owe you a career in Congress. But anyway, so gerrymandering forces these districts on us. And so you'll have a state, for instance, like Texas, where about a third of the people in the state are independent. Same for Maryland, same for other states. So a third are not Democrats or Republicans. And they want us to stay on this two-track road, Democrat, Republican, and that's it. That's part of the problem. May I share one more thing real quick? Because I know Pastor K may want to say something.
Yeah,
until recently, I was an unaffiliated voter in Maryland, which means independent. I was not Democrat or Republican. And then in the primary 2 years ago, I went to vote. In the primary, they had election for school board, which is supposedly nonpartisan, and for retention of circuit court judges, which is also supposedly nonpartisan. But because I wasn't a Democrat or a Republican, I did not get to vote in the primary. And we have these two private corporations, the DNC and RNC, Republican National Committee, Democrat National Committee, that run our politics. They're private corporations. They're not in the Constitution. They're not anywhere. And we have let them do that to the point where even when there are debates, well, you're not polling at 20%. You can't even get on the stage. Well, how? So no one gets to hear their ideas. And that's why we're on this roller coaster back and forth, back and forth. And that's why, my brothers and sisters, your votes are so essential. Because when more of you show up than they were counting on, things happen. Positive things happen and change can happen.
Thank you. Dr. K?
No, I just had a question. Steve, if you wouldn't mind just stepping back. I think when you were giving your presentation, you mentioned that in 1970, I believe, that the Electoral College could have been eliminated. It had a bipartisan majority. What happened? What stopped that?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question. It brings into the picture the need to educate people today about the history of our two parties. Because a lot of people are downing the Democratic Party and saying, well, the Republican Party was. But I don't think I understand the switching.
Exactly.
That it's important that we educate people, because the Republican initiative party supported in America because Americans in slavery. But
Apostle, you're buffering.
Okay, can you hear me?
You're buffering.
Yeah, you were.
Oh wow.
We can hear you now, but
okay.
Right.
Oh wow. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I didn't get the answer to my question though.
Yes, I'm coming to your question.
Because it was going to be a change. They didn't, because see, as long as there's the Electoral College, if nothing else, and we know it was established because of slavery, but it was also a safety valve, I think, to prevent the worst possible thing from happening. But then in 2016, it failed us and the worst possible thing happened. And so we've been dealing with the era of Trump for the last that's 2016. So that's 8 years so far. He came down that golden escalator in 2015, and he's trying to get back in. And the only reason he's even running, because he was a horrible president, and everybody knows it, the only reason he's running is to stay out of jail, because he's broken so many laws. And so the Electoral College is his only shot to get back in.
So Steve, can I finish?
Well, you were buffering. You were go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope I don't buffer, because I got to make this point. The Electoral College was not formed for slavery. It was reinforced by the 3/5 Compromise. It was formed as a real true buffer because of the problems that they were trying to avoid from their lessons with Great Britain and their type of government. But they did not imagine that they were going to have so many people that would have a right to vote, which would change a whole lot about how this country would go forward. And so what I was going to say about that change in the 70s is because you remember when the age goes down, you have a different group of people who are voting that are 18 now. And most 18 to 23-year-olds are mostly the people that have been the root of change, the college students, the rebels. And so giving them this opportunity to make change, it wasn't going to just stop with how people are treated. It was going to also go straight across the board, and it would have definitely reformed the voting process. So, again, the Constitution being framed started with young people. That's what's so critical. I know they look like old heads in them pictures, but those were their presidential pictures later in life, I guess. But they were young people who were trying to form a more perfect union, per se. And so their ideals were based on their limitations, what they saw. They didn't know what Black people, who we really were. All they know, we were multiplying because they were bringing us here from the 1600s, but we also helped them win the independence, right? So it's kind of like give and take. And then every time there is conflict, we are a central part of change. And likewise, the same is happening in the 70s. This is a spinoff from the 60s and Black Power, which, may I add, it's important to see the role that people like Malcolm X and all of those folks who were on the road for Black education, Black Power. They had a tremendous impact on our willingness to go to the polls.
All right, I think we lost you again.
Yeah.
We lost you.
Oh,
we lost you again. Well, not all the way, because when you talk about the change in the 70s, that you now talk about my era, because I turned 18 then, and yes, that's when I began to vote. But I thought I heard him said that in 1970 there was a bipartisan majority agreement to now eliminate the Electoral College. My question is, if we had the bipartisan majority, what stopped it? Why did it not go through? That's my question.
You were talking to me or Steve?
I was talking to
bipartisan agreement. Yes,
because it was in Steve's book.
Oh, right.
I thought you were
right, Steve.
So
he wrote that in the book. Okay, I got you.
So I would say one of the main obstacles is that more of the rank and file, the younger members who didn't have as much skin in the game, who wanted to eliminate the Electoral College. And you had the older lions and the committee chairs, and committee chairs functioned like, and I'm not meaning to be disrespectful, but functioned like gods in the legislature. If you wanted to do anything in the legislature, you had to get in line. And so they were able to apply their pressure to kind of kill it. But look at what has happened to our country. Now there have been about 5 elections, very quickly, where the person who got the keys to the White House did not win the popular vote. But in the 1800s, basically these are people, country first, country before party, country before self, country before I'm trying to stay out of jail, country first. But in the 20th century, or actually the beginning of the 21st century, Al Gore beat George W. Bush in the popular vote, and actually beating him in Florida till they started playing games. George W. Bush gets the keys to the White House. What does he do? He appoints John Roberts and Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. So 5 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court were appointed by people who didn't win the popular vote. Trump did 3, 2 of which were stolen, one from Obama and then one from, I guess, Biden, because they decided they were going to ignore the fact that Alito was dead for 11 months. He died in February 2016. And they did, like, you know how we used to do as kids, la, 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 la. That's what the Republicans did. It's like, we're not doing it. We think the people should decide. The people did decide. They voted for Obama twice. But anyway, so 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by people who lost the election. And then, of course, after that, Bush and Cheney invade a country that doesn't attack us, Iraq, and gets 4,000 of my comrades in arms killed, and tens of thousands wounded, and over 100,000 Iraqis killed. And, oh yeah, they crashed the economy. So when you put somebody in that does not enjoy the consent of the governed, bad things can happen. George W. Bush was a bad thing. Clearly, a bad thing. The Electoral College needs to go. But I don't see it happening politically because of gerrymandering and just the calculus and Republicans knowing we want to keep doing things the way we do them. We just and we can try and eke out a win in the Electoral College and keep tearing stuff up. That's a problem, and that's why we're in the difficulty that we're in my opinion.
Got
Or
it.
1907, when you talk the Electoral College in the representatives, but in the Senate, it did not. Am I right,
Got
Steve?
it. Okay.
I remember that.
You're right.
I'm too young to know, but I remember
And what's
reading
the
it.
F word in the Senate that keeps
Filibuster.
progressive things from happening? The filibuster.
Here it is.
Filibuster.
Filibuster.
Yeah, I remember
So,
it.
and hold on to that word. I'm going to do a reel on the filibuster too, because the way that works is unless you can get 60 people to say, yes, let's move forward and do this. And how are you going to do that in a Senate that's 51-49? You can't get anything done. So people want to blame Vice President Harris because the George Floyd criminal justice bill didn't pass. That's because of the filibuster. They want to blame President Biden because the John Lewis Voting Rights Act didn't pass. That's because of the filibuster. But the filibuster is not in the Constitution. It's a Senate rule, and that's all. And every time a new session of Congress begins, they establish their rules. And so if Democrats are fortunate enough to have the majority in 2025, they need to put the filibuster in a shredder or something and govern so they can pass laws that make a difference. Because if they don't, you're going to have conservative courts continuing to frustrate what the people would have wanted presidents and legislatures to do, and it's going to continue.
Well, Pastor T, Pastor J has been trying to hop in.
If I'm not wrong, I mean, if you guys can give me more information if I'm off base, but around the time when the movement to get rid of the Electoral College it hit that wall, the GOP stepped up their efforts, and we began to see, and this is why it's important for us to pay attention not just to what's happening in Congress, but pay attention to those 2 corporations that you were talking about, and the other discussions. ALEC came to being, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and I want people to pay attention to that. American Legislative Exchange Council, which meant that your votes have become money. And then the words that Paul Weyrich spoke so clearly. He said, we do not want them to vote because when they vote, we lose. It was a clear understanding at that particular point that the conservative agenda began to suffer because they didn't have the votes of clear thinking, sane people to help their cause. Their cause has always been for the demise of democracy And I know I'm going to cause problems with a lot of my friends when I say that, because I believe everybody should be at the table. But I think everybody should be at the table and nobody should be pushing people away from the table. So when you make statements like, we don't want them to vote, that's a clear threat to the premise of democracy. And that is where things started changing. And we ended up getting things like the Contract on America and organized efforts legislatively. But these efforts were starting in the states and at ALEC meetings. As a matter of fact, ALEC's whole point is for states' rights. They realize that things will get sandbagged when their mischief, I want to be clear, get sandbagged in Congress under the sanitizing power of light. But in the states, all this stuff, if the states pass these laws, then the whole culture of the country starts to change, because 30 states are putting forth a conservative agenda that meets the needs of the power hungry that are out there. I just wanted to share that thought.
So
Yeah,
I want to, if I can jump in just quickly, so we have 4 minutes left. I just wanted to just kind of go back to kind of the golden age of voting and Black folk rights when we talk about Reconstruction. And we see the first Black senators, we see the first Black lawmakers, we see such progress.
Yes.
And how what steps can we begin to make in our local governments, and also during this election, to begin to experience some of that reclaiming of the power that we saw in Reconstruction? Because at this time, I'm, for all intents and purposes, I'm the youngest one on this restream, right? And so I'm dealing with young people that are disenfranchised. I'm dealing with young people that have no, are clueless to some degrees about the political process. And so when we're, learning about, the golden age of when we did have rights, for some, this is kind of the light bulb coming back on all over again, right? And so I want to make sure that in this conversation that we're speaking to those who are just tuning in for the very first time and paying attention for the very first time. And why is having this historical background important for them? Can you speak to why is this important for them to know this history in order to empower them to make informed decisions? And I think that's a piece that we need to address in our conversation on today, so that those who are not just undecided in who they're going to vote for, but undecided in their vote and voting period, that they will have a better understanding of what their vote could do.
Yes. I would say one, education. Because the narrative that we have followed has led to where we are. And it is to make it so confusing that you just give up. It's almost like the illiteracy that comes with voting and the voting language. People need to be able to, we have to correct the narrative, and we have to begin to teach the history of voting. And so that young people can see there's nothing new under the sun. What was happening then is happening right now. We can look at the end of Reconstruction, and we can look at Black Lives Matters. We can look at the government's role in enforcing change, and the military in their rightful role of coming in to protect the rights of people who have a right to coexist. And we can look at how the military has been used to combat those rights.
Absolutely.
And I think when we start speaking that language, we're speaking to the thing they're angry about. And then we start talking about what are the solutions. I think it's important we start to talk to them about some of the political actions that have been taken by groups like SNCC and so many others that were just college students who said, no way, Jose. Not just Black students, the white kids that lost their lives. But, it happens, real change happens on that level.
Right.
That's what the power to change our nation has to be taken away put back into the hands of the innovative, creative thinkers that have always been the ones. And I think to walk them through history and show them this in action and show them how grassroots organizing really is from the bottom up is the way to change what's at the top. I believe that's a part of the.
And I think there are 26 states in the country that no longer require civics education in high school.
Yes.
So we have a group of people growing up not learning the history, not learning about their government. That's how you can have Jimmy Kimmel and others have these interviews, the man on the street, the woman on the street. Who's your mayor in the city of New York? Now, maybe more people know about him now because he's been indicted, but who's your mayor? Who are your senators? How many, who's the president? And they don't know. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing. The second thing, Dr. Torrey, is this year is a presidential election year. So everybody's paying attention. Then they're going to take off until 2028. So what happened in President Obama? Obama won 69 million votes in 2008, more than anybody in history. He had 60 people in the United States Senate. He could have governed his tail off. Well, he was a little more modest than I would have liked. I would have been more, let's do it, swing for the fences. But what happened? 2010 comes and nobody shows up to vote. So instead of 60% of the vote showing up, 40% of the people voted, and the 40% don't want the same things the 60% wants. How is that important to us here in Anne Arundel County? Next year is 2025. The city council and the mayor are elected in Annapolis. You can't take that off. 2026, the state legislature and the governor are elected. You can't take that off. Every time the polls open, you need to show up and vote. And if you don't, people who don't share your interests will show up and vote, and they'll put people in who will frustrate the agenda of the people you put in who you wanted to succeed.
Yeah, and I think, Tori, that the role of the church is critical. The church was a hub for us when we were really fighting hard in the 60s, and it was our safe space. As a result of the church, we were really okay with being separate and having our way of teaching, and to some degree, desegregation kind of really put a wrench in us, But I think it's important that the church reclaim a role in educating. We can have programs that educate our children and our youth, and we can set up mock governments and things of that sort, so that we introduce them to the language of politics early, so that they aspire to be politicians and to change the game. Because I really believe that if we get hung up on the electoral college piece, we've missed a big piece, because it's the only election that is controlled by electors. Everything else is by popular vote. So that means that your school board members is just as critical, because it matters what content we are having thrown out of our schools, because it's black intended, and so the people sitting on the board make just as critical decisions as the people in Congress. The people who are judges make just as critical decisions about our lives. They see us come in the room. It doesn't matter who we have as an attorney, because we're black, they're going to deem us guilty. So we have to see that the enrollment and that the involvement in local politics is just as powerful. So that when we begin to see power level work, to go for the big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So y'all, next week we don't want people to miss next week, right? Because next week we'll get.
Enjoy this conversation? Don't miss our next session on Tuesday, October 8th, where we'll tackle strategic voting and understanding the entire ballot. Now back to our panel for final remarks.
Tell you, we're next we're going to talk about strategic voting, the later, because you don't understand. Get some understanding. We're here to help you get clarity in voting. And I'm so glad to be joined with my colleagues, you guys. That's my final words. Stay with us until next week. Don't miss it. You're going to have many reasons to vote, okay? Use your voice.
Amen.
Other final comments?
Sure, I'll just jump in as far as, and this kind of going on with what Dr. Butler was speaking. It is so critical that we have to take it upon ourselves to educate our kids, our young people, because that's where the force is. Every movement that has taken place has been from young people being at the forefront. We saw what happened with Black Lives Matter and all the way. So it is really critical for us. And for parents to get it, I just think back with me growing up, I went to the voting booth in the voting booth with my parents, so, we have to make sure we bring our children along with us so that they can see us in action and have these conversations. So I'm totally in agreement with that. It's going to take the church educating, it's going to take our families educating, and somehow we got to get civics back into the schools because folks have no idea how the government runs, and that's exactly why they're blaming, Biden for things, and because they don't understand how the government runs. So, yeah, great conversation with you guys today.
Dr. K, my mom did the same. I was so fascinated. She took me back when you had to pull the lever down.
Yeah.
And the ballot, and that got me involved in the political process. And currently, my dad serves as a poll worker.
Yes.
And my church is a poll place for Anne Arundel County. So
that's awesome.
So I'm invested in making sure that we are voting, that we are using our voices, that we are using our bodies to show up and continue to show that our voices, our concerns really do matter in our county and also our state. And so I hope and pray that you all will stay on with us next week as we go through the whole ballot, because sometimes that ballot is confusing. We don't know who from what. And so we'll just end up voting down the line and have no idea who we're voting for and what they believe in. And I think it's so important for us to take a step back, to do some research, to find out who these people are. Sometimes they send out mock ballots for you so that you have an ability to just kind of go through and mark up who you want to vote for because you've done the research. So you're just not randomly filling in a block or leaving a block empty because you weren't informed about the policies.
Right. Yeah. I like to tag on with Dr. Butler for our young people. I don't know how many people are aware, but you can register at the age of 16. And while you cannot vote until you're 18, you're registered. And what does that mean? When you're a registered voter, that means that you can work at the polls and you can actually be there and lend a hand. And you get paid. It's not much, but you get paid when you are a poll judge. And so if you go and you get involved in that, you can learn about the process firsthand. And then when you are ready, you will be voting soon. I have a 14-year-old child, and I told her the next president election, she will be voting for the president of the United States, and she's 14. Think about that process.
Yeah.
I am grateful for our young people. They put the pedal to the metal when a lot of us want to back off, but they're the ones, Karen and Jay, y'all probably remember when we were in elementary school and they had the emergency exercise. In case of a nuclear attack, get under your desk. Remember that? Well,
unfortunately,
these kids are
yeah, I remember too.
Yeah.
But these kids are learning they have, how to shelter in place and block the door and all that because of guns. Everybody else is there like, no, this has been our life. We're tired of this. And also, and Pastor Tori mentioned something about states' rights. States' rights is coming back in good form too, because that's what's happening with these ballot initiatives for women to take back agency over their medical care. And that's only because of ballot, because the gerrymandered state legislatures won't do it. So our young people keep coming out, keep learning, ask questions. We know we don't have all the answers, but whatever we know, we are glad to share. And then let's do it together and turn this thing upside down and right side up while we still have time.
So, ladies and gentlemen, until next week, we are African American pastors, and voting is your Black job.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Go. There you go.
We're still live.